In this video, I'm going to show you how to master your song like a pro in 10 minutes with stock Logic plugins. My name's Tyson. I've mastered over 1,000 songs as a professional mastering engineer, and I've also beat out $1 million studios with my in-the-box mastering chain, which I'm going to show you how to do and replicate with stock plugins today. So let's get started. There are 5 steps to mastering your song like a pro using stock plugins. So the first step that we need to do is EQ on our master. So just what you're looking at right now so far is we have our mix that we're actually mastering right here, and then we also have the same mix. I've just copied it and then I've limited it so it's louder, right? So basically I have now a baseline of what I'm trying to beat. If I can't make the song better with mastering than just the mix that's limited, then what am I trying to do, right? So it's just a good baseline of knowing how much better than the actual mix I'm getting. So let's get started on step 1, though, is fixing sonic issues. So specifically what we are looking at with this is frequencies between about 100 hertz and 4 to 5 kilohertz. That should be a straight line all the way across on this analyzer, which can be seen by pink noise. So pink noise is the perfect representation of every frequency in the frequency spectrum having equal power all the way across. So as you can tell, between 100 hertz right here and then 5 kilohertz or so right here, it's a straight line all the way across. That's what we are trying to meet in that region in our own master. So let's go ahead and play our mix, and just you can compare side by side here between the 2 analyzers. Okay, so you can tell that there's a little bit more energy in this low range, especially that snare. You can kind of see that popping out. And then you can also see that basically everything above that, so 500 all the way through to that 5 kilohertz range, is just overall a little bit weak. So we want to enhance those sections, maybe bring down the lower 200 hertz region, and then we're going to have a much better sonic balance overall. So let's go ahead and dive into that. So the first EQ I'm going to reach for is one of these vintage EQ collection. I'm going to use the graphic EQ, but I'm going to change the output model to the smooth. So this is essentially the console EQ. I just like this interface better. It's a little easier to use. So that's the reason why I'm reaching for this one instead. So let's go ahead and play it and revisit. I'm just going to walk through all the frequencies, right, between this 125 and then 4 kilohertz. Actually, let's move this up a little bit. Yeah, let's start at like 150. That looks good. And now I'm going to just walk through, and I'm going to watch the pink noise over here and then my mix, and then I'm just going to correct everything that I see. These are relatively broad moves. I don't want to make anything dramatic, right? I'm going to be doing like half decibel moves here. All right, so let's get started. All right, so you can tell I didn't make any moves more than half a decibel, and it already sounds way more like a finished product, like a actual final master. So that's the first step. Okay, so the next step now is diving into sonic enhancement. So this is step 2 of the mastering process. And we're going to be diving into another one of these fancy vintage EQs, but we're going to be reaching for this tube EQ instead. So this is going to start leaning into everything that was not the mid-range, right? So we were looking at everything between 100 hertz and 5 kilohertz. Now we're going to be looking at the outside regions. So I like to view this as kind of like a pizza dough. So when we get a pizza dough, right, it's in this little blob, and that's basically representing our mid-range, that, you know, once it's all created, right? And now our job is to stretch that pizza dough so it fills up the entire pan. Similarly, in mastering, we're trying to stretch the frequency spectrum to fill up the entire audible frequency spectrum that we can hear. That's going to sound the best to humans because we like hearing everything represented. And so this is the kind of the secret, if you will, of a lot of mastering, is that we're going to subtly enhance that top and low end to stretch this mix out so it actually fills up those areas where it's usually lacking. So let's take a look at our analyzer again, and we're going to identify those areas that need to be corrected with this enhancement type EQ. So you can tell right here, there's actually a pretty good drop off on that low end, especially around that 30 hertz. So we're going to actually boost probably right at 30 hertz, and then with a pretty healthy boost to bring up that low end. Overall, again, it's quite weak in this mix overall. So let's focus on that first. All right, so I am using this attenuation just a little bit. So this is going to attenuate or bring down, right? It's cutting just above the boost. So it's kind of like tilting the whole curve a little bit. So that's the only thing that is doing. I'm just adding a little bit because I was noticing that the snare was getting a little bit too strong in that low end with this really large boost on the bottom end there. But overall, it's sounding really good. I like what it's doing. So let's move on to the highs now. So now we're shifting our focus from the low end into the high range, and let's see what's going on up there. So you can tell there's nothing really above that 10 to 12 kilohertz range. So we're definitely going to be wanting to boost up here. I'm going to just crank this like crazy. I'm going to see how far down I can go before I run into issues. Likely the sibilance in the vocal is going to be the biggest issue I run into. It's not nearly as bad as I thought. So let's try to give that a 2 decibel boost there. Okay, so we're almost done. I did actually just cut the 200 hertz region just a little bit more with that tube EQ. We got one more move though. This is still enhancement type EQ. I'm going to grab my linear phase EQ for this guy, and we're going to enhance this top end. So now we're going to enhance this top end here. So I'm gonna crank this this shelf as high as possible, and we're gonna do like a massive boost, like 10 decibels, and then I'm gonna use this Q value to get as much top end as I want out of this mix overall. So this is just like really enhancing those ultra highs that we can barely hear, and as we get older we can hear less of, but this is going to give it that sheen and polish that is so characteristic of a good master. So here we go. Let's dial this in. All right, so I just subtly boosted the whole top end a little bit more. It was still a little bit weak, but this is really the ultimate move here, right? It's just brings so much brightness and so much just clarity in the master. You can't skip that move. So again, what we've done so far is we've done sonic balancing. We have done enhancement on the low end and the top end, as well as this move, which is enhancing the top end a little bit more. Now we are done with EQ. Now it's time to move on to our compression chains. So this is step number 3 in the mastering process, which is clipping. So this isn't always necessary. This is an optional step. However, I really like clipping just to control everything before my normal compressor comes in, because this is going to help control any stray transients, usually snares, that are going to impact the threshold or the gain going into my compression, so my compression can actually react more naturally to the master. So it's not always necessary, but for anything that's really pokey, so anything that's percussive heavy, a lot of hip-hop mixes is a huge offender of this. Basically, we're just going to use some clipping distortion on this, and then we're going to use the limiter here. So I'm going to make my threshold and ratio 1:1 and 0 respectively. So we're not actually using any of this, and auto gain should be off. We're not using this compressor here. We're just using this limiter right here. And then I'm going to bring down this limiter until I'm getting just barely any gain reduction, because what I'm looking for is just to clip off any of those really strong transients. I'm not really trying to do anything other than just control any potential issues that arise from this particular move. All right, so let's get started. So you can tell it's getting about half a decibel gain reduction at certain points in time. That's perfect. That's exactly what I was looking for. So that's as easy as that gets. Let's move on to the next stage of compression. So this is step number 4, which is adding some stylistic compression to our master. So this is going to be adding either punchy or groovy style compression, usually to the master. If your master is still just way too transient heavy, so we have big peaks of the waveform that still need to be controlled and we're not going to get the loudness we want out of the master, then we can lean into more of a thickness style compression. But I generally lean away from that because normally our mixes are already so saturated and heavy, we don't need to add any more thickness to our tracks. So let's dial in our groovy style compression. This is my go-to compression for all masters. I use it probably 95% of the time because it's just that one way to add more feeling and groove and movement to the song without actually having to really do that much. So we are going to be using a 50 to 100 millisecond attack and then a very fast release around 50 milliseconds. So this is going to be able to get us away from the transients. So the transients are the peaks of the audio are not going to be touched. So we're going to allow those to pass through, but then we're going to compress right after those. We're kind of digging out this little tiny like scoop right behind all those transients. And this basically increases the already pre-existing dynamics in the track, and therefore we're actually able to increase the amount of dynamics in the master overall without having to really do anything other than just add a little bit of compression. So it's a super powerful technique, especially if your mix is very thick like this one is kind of lacking a little bit of life. This is really going to make a huge difference in being able to get it a little bit more closer over the edge to that more like movement and groove that you're looking for. Beyond that, just a word of warning, do not use stereo enhancing plugins on your master. You will cause way more issues than you're solving with that. So just follow this process and you'll be much more safe. Okay, so let's dive in. We're going to use a 3-to-1 ratio, 100 millisecond attack, 50 millisecond release, and knee's going to be pretty high. And then we're aiming for about 1 or so decibels of gain reduction. All right, and then the last step is just to drive this into our final limiter. So we're going to pull up our adaptive limiter here, and I'm going to drive it out of this makeup right here on this compressor. It gives it a slight more character from the compressor, so I prefer it. It's really not going to make a huge difference in your master overall, so don't feel like it's a necessary step, but I'm just trying to be transparent with everything that I would do here, mastering with stock Logic plugins. So here we go. Let's move on to the next phase here. I'm going to be looking at the loudness, the LUFS over here, and we're just going to kind of see how far I can push it before I start getting a lot of added distortion to the track. Generally speaking, I try to get less than 3 decibels of gain reduction with my limiter because that's going to allow me to have the most natural sounding master, and I know I'm not crushing too many dynamics. And if I did a good job on my sonic balance, I won't need more compression than that to really get up to the loudness that I'm looking for. So let's start pushing this guy up. All right, so I'm not quite getting the loudness that I'm looking for out of this track, so I'm going to lean into this clipper just a little bit more. I'm going to shave off another decibel or so. And then I'm going to be able to move this guy down 1 decibel on the threshold, right? Because I've decreased the volume of the track overall. And then we should be able to get a little bit more loudness out of this. All right, so that is the master with stock plugins.